our buildings are already old. And could you imagine working in the police department and them not doing the cleaning of the ducts? I wouldn't want to work in there. I'm just saying personally, I wouldn't want to work in there. And I don't know. And the other thing is the reducing training and education. Running a business and an operation as large as we do, I mean, our number one complaints are about customer service. And so if we are going to reduce the training, that's just going to get worse, in my opinion. And that's the largest number of complaints that I receive. So it may be selfish on my part, but our citizens deserve, to be treated. And it takes constant work. And so sometimes a morale problem can cause maybe nastiness or complacency at their job, and then it gets taken out on the residents of our city. And then that goes back along with like the building painting. If we're doing all this work, the police department and the fire department is doing all this work on our streets, but the citizens have to look at, ripped up buildings, or I don't know, you just look at all of it, and if we're going to move forward, it has to be together. And the together part we're missing.
What is missing is a recommendation from the city manager. Thus far, we gave you A, you asked me to come back with B, and then you asked me to take a little bit of A and a little bit of B. In terms of solvency of services, maintaining equipment, replacement funds, etc., maintaining some degree of certificates or whatever. Option C is the best for me in terms of my recommendation. When it comes to the Measure U, it deals only with the surplus. It doesn't deal with the $10 million whatsoever. It maintains that intact, which is the budget for police and the budget for fire, in terms of what they've asked for and been blessed by the Measure U committee. There's no reduction. There's surplus in that. And so we have a boon that came in, $1.3 million that was never forecast. And so that's what we're talking about, touching. $1 million of that $1.3 million, the other $300,000 would go, into the Measure U whatsoever. So I know there's been policy decisions, and I know the Measure U committee has a stance, and there's concern about the fact that eventually we were going to take Measure U funds and spend it on other general fund purposes and such, and that's been the accusation. In this case, we're dealing with a surplus that was never forecast. We're not impacting the Measure U budget whatsoever, and so the city manager's recommendation is option C.
Okay, my turn. I want to thank you for the work that you guys have put into this, because I know it's painstaking and it takes a lot of hours to do that. There's some comments that were made about Jerry Brown and the state of California, and we're just trying to go with the hand that's being dealt. I know that there's been comments made by some other people, a member of the Measure U Oversight Committee. I was at the meeting on Monday, and some comments that were made that the city has not addressed, and somebody brought it up over here about the structural deficit, and the comment was that the structural deficit has not been addressed over the years, for many years, and I would like to beg to differ on that. I haven't been on council, and three of us haven't been on council for very long, but I think that the previous council did a lot of good in trying to reduce and make cuts where they could. I mean, our staffing levels are at bare bones. When people come in to get those building permits and to start building, we need to have people there that can get them through the process efficiently. And if we continue to make cuts from those positions, they're not going to come to Hemet to build and open their business. They're going to go to a neighboring city where customer service is top priority. So I think that the city has addressed, and this council has addressed over the years, even before I got on council, and previous councils I think have done that to make cuts and to bring the deficit down, and I think they've done a good job. And I think that you've done an outstanding job bringing balanced budget options to us. And I know it's difficult to do. But one of the things that's kind of frustrating for me is the Measure U, even in option A, $1.7 million used from Measure U to pay for general fund positions. And there was a comment made at the last budget meeting that there wasn't anything said about non-Measure U public safety employees and Measure U. Well, does that mean that if the chiefs purchase equipment under Measure U, if I'm a non-Measure U employee, do I not get to use that Measure U equipment because I'm not Measure U? I mean, are we going to get to that point? And I think the answer should be no, because the purpose of the Measure U Oversight Committee and the resolutions that were passed and the Measure U itself were the spirit behind it was this city needs to increase public safety. And let's be honest with ourselves, is that had Measure U not passed, the MOUs that we're talking about covering with Measure U money to pay for public safety, those MOUs would have never been signed, never been agreed to, because where would the money come from? So this council made a decision to bring our police department and our fire department up so that we could get more people to want to come here, for one, and hopefully not have our people do a mass exodus for two. And so I think that it's very important that while, yes, the previous employees are not Measure U employees, they're still public safety officers. And they're here because they want to be in Hemet. And that MOU I know there's been talks, we're not going to get the raises coming out of that. Public safety was a priority of the citizens of this community, and giving those raises kept people here, but it also enticed other people to come. Had that not gone through, I think we would still we wouldn't be where we're at today in public safety. I don't think the fire department would be fully staffed. I don't think the police department would be up 16, is it 16? 16 officers. We may be up a few, but I don't think we would be at 16. And I don't think the people that are actually out on the streets, and I drive through Hemet every day, I have an office here, and I see a difference, and people that I talk to see a difference. And that's what the spirit of Measure U was for. Looking at your options, even if we were to go with option A and say $1.7 million from Measure U funds to pay for general fund positions, those are still public safety, and that's what the resolution states, is that the money's spent on public safety. So whether you were a police officer or a firefighter that was here before Measure U, you're still in public safety. You're not in public safety. So I think that's important, and I think that message hasn't been getting out there very much. We're just taking from the general fund to pay for them, or we're taking from Measure U to pay for to balance the general fund. Well, no, we're paying if we were to go with option A, we're going to take from Measure U to pay for public safety, and that's what the charge of the people were in passing Measure U. And I know there was a comment made that Measure E, prior to Measure U, failed by 600 votes. And Measure U passed at 60-40, which was actually 62-38. So it still passed at a very high percentage. So people in this community knew that public safety was a #1 priority for this community. And I think all of these, even if option A and C, I think those still meet that criteria. And it troubles me when people that work here in this, have businesses and they make a comment that they're not Measure U employees. Well, they're public safety employees. Whether they were hired pre or post Measure U, it's still public safety. It's still one public safety, one police department, and one fire department for public safety. And it's frustrating for me that we are there's division, even in the letter that we received from the Oversight Committee, because they are doing their job, looking at the public Measure U to make sure that money that comes in is being spent on public safety. And it will be. And that's what I think is important to note. And it's not about, in some language that's in this letter that we received, is that it's not about technical wording, it's the actual wording that's in the resolution that any of these options fit with under. So for me, I know Carly said option A, but option C is not much different than option A. It restores equipment replacement. It keeps facilities where they both have hiring freezes. I think there's probably some departments that need some more personnel so that we can get more development and more building and get the city moving again. So for me, I think my position is to go with the city manager's recommendation.
Can I key off what you've just been talking about? And it's not specific to A, B, or C options on it. I've been here 9 months, maybe 10 months, whatever, and it amazes me that a measure that was supported almost, 2/3 to 1/3 or whatever can cause divisiveness among the city. You had a large proportion of the city support Measure U. Everything we're dealing with the budget is supporting Measure U and public safety. And I feel like there's entities within the city that are kind of tearing it apart a little bit. And so it's frustrating to me not to always be able to work with the police and fire chief, to be unanimous, to be on the same page, etc. It's frustrating to me to be at odds with the Measure U committee. My job here is to help bring this all together and live happily ever after. And so I'm just kind of pleading that we're on the same page here. We may take a different road, etc. You may take a different road than my recommendation, but hopefully we end up at the same point, and that's a greater degree of solvency and still a good level of services here. So, and
I agree, and I know that there's for the people that voted no on Measure U, who wants to pay more in taxes, right? Nobody really wants. The level of expectation of services is up here, but the question is who's going to pay for it. And so I think there's a lot of people that vote no, and I voted no many times for tax increases, because especially when they go to the state, because people can't trust the state. They say it's for one thing, but then 6 months later the Assembly and the Senate passes a bill that diverts that money from roads and schools and whatever, and uses it for their own little pet projects. I think there's a difference, though, at this local level, that we are closer to all of you. It's more convenient for you to come here than it is to go to Sacramento to listen in on public hearings that they have there. And we're held there's a lot more accountability here, and we continue to want to make staff accountable, especially with Bonnie brought it up. I know it was brought up at the last budget meeting last year about internal services. If you want full transparency, let's get rid of internal services and actually put the money in the budget of each department to actually cover the cost of what they're doing, instead of billing to police or billing to fire or billing to water or whatever. That's going to be the ultimate transparency and where the money's really going and what it's being used for, and that's what people want to see, including us. I want to know where the money goes. I want to know what the real cost is to maintain a police car for a year. Brand new cars shouldn't cost the same as a 20-year-old car. But, are we taking just a flat number just to balance? One car may cost more, but, it's those kind of things that if there's more transparency. Or the question could be, can I take my car, can we take a car that needs maintenance, routine oil changes, can we take it to a local mechanic to have it done for, I can get my car done at the dealer for less than $200 to get my oil changed. How much does it really cost? So those are the kinds of things that I think people want to see more transparency, including us. But most importantly, I think it's having a balanced budget that we haven't had for years, And we have. And here, and with that, let me ask you this. As far as the money, the revenue that was generated by Measure U, how much is rollover from the last year that wasn't spent? So even if we allocated, that we budgeted to spend it all, how much rolled over because it wasn't spent? And then my next follow-up question to that is, if we look at last year's budget that was passed, how much rollover was there from last year to this year that wasn't spent?
So from 16-17, they projected to spend $2.2 million. Measure U, my apologies, which was what was projected to come in. And it was their 6-month jumpstart program that they were going to get a lot of public safety employees hired. Again, that takes time. So of that $2.2 million that we actually did collect, because we collected the full amount, they did not spend $1.2 million of it. They spent just under $1 million of it. In the current year,
So that extra million rolls over.
it rolled over, yes.
It'll continue to roll over.
Police gets 2/3 of it, and fire gets 1/3 based on how much they spend. In the current year, the $10 million again is split, 2/3 police, 1/3 fire. Of the 2/3 for police, a second. Police projected to spend or budgeted to spend $6.2 million. Their allocation would have been $6.6 million. They're 66% spent year to date. Now, we do have one more payroll that's going to hit this expenditure report, but right now, today, they have $2,079,000 unspent in the current year.
And they're not going to spend
They'll
between now
spend
and
a
the end.
small portion of it for that payroll.
So there's going to be another $2 million that's going to roll over.
Same thing for fire. Fire projected to spend $1.8 million of their $3.3 that they're entitled to in the current fiscal year. They have about $500,000 left of that,
Which is going to roll over.
which is going to roll over.
So as we keep seeing year after year these rollovers, if Measure U doesn't get extended beyond 10 years, there's these years after years of rollovers that will continue to fund these public safety positions.
So I was asked to continue and update a spreadsheet that Joy Canfield had started when she was here. And what it did was it took every line item in police Measure U and fire Measure U and started with the projected revenues and subtracted all of the budgeted expenditures from that. And with that plan, fire was projected to end 17-18, the current year, with $2,188,000. That's not taking into account that additional $500,000 that will be left over. It does take into account the carryover from 16-17, but not those 500. So really, they're going to end up at almost 2.7, $2,688,000.
That will roll over to the following fiscal year.
And that doesn't take into account the fact that when we put the 17-18 budget together, we projected $10 million in revenues
So we're
coming
not
in.
going back and saying, hey, we've got this extra 2.7, let's spend it on something.
Right.
Or the 1 million over that's coming in, the extra revenue. You didn't include that in it, it's not included.
Right, it's not included in these balances. Police's balance was projected at $964,000 for the year, with $2 million left over that they were not able to spend in the current year because of vacancies or for whatever reason. You add that $2 million, they're almost at $3 million fund balance at the end of this year, and that's not taking into account any revenues above the $10 million. And just so everyone here knows, we received our sales tax payment today. $824,000 for Measure U, $900,000 something for general sales tax. Measure U's total year to date, $9.4 million. We still have 2 more payments left before we close the books. I'm pretty confident we are going to be over $11 million for the year. I have no reason not to believe that with an $824,000 payment in this quarter, and we still have 2 more payments left.
So we all need to keep buying in Hemet.
I do. And I don't even live here. And I do. I spend
Okay.
my tax dollars here.
So based on the last few years, or since the inception of Measure U, since we started, and the spending that the police and fire have done, if we were to project 10 years out based on that same rate, we would look at probably having an extra $20 million sitting in Measure U unspent.
That could happen because at the end of 17-18, we're talking about almost $3 million for each, so $6 million.
So
At the end of this current
even
year.
picking one of these budget options up here, we're still being pretty responsible with
Yes,
the
we are.
funding.
Absolutely. And it still keeps us within that 72% that we're required to fund public safety. We're actually at 73.6%.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff before I open the public hearing? Or comments?
I just want to say one thing, and that is, I know we've said it before, but Lorena, you're doing a great job,
Thank you.
and your department, and you know what, all the departments. We have such incredibly loyal employees, and under all these circumstances, year after year, they've stuck it out with us. So the bashing that goes on everywhere else, on Facebook and everything else, is absolutely uncalled for, because these guys have stuck it out thick and thin, and I commend them for that. It's a hard thing to do when you're expecting one thing and your work conditions are not what you expected, you're overworked, you have 3 different hats, and I just want to thank staff for everything that they do on a daily basis. And Lorena, you, except for the internal services, I'm still mad about that. I still want to see city attorney fees and internal services separate on one sheet to show what each department gets. I'm not happy at all that it's mixed up the way it is this time.
Okay, so if I may,
Yes.
there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into internal service funds, and maybe because I see it so much during the process, it makes complete sense to me, but I understand what you're saying. So if I'd like to take IT, for example. So IT's budget summary is on page 260 of either options B or C. The page numbers didn't change. Last year, I heard your message loud and clear. 260. 260. You said you wanted to see everything on one page. I added a summary page showing the funding sources, which are what each department is paying for IT services. So that top half of IT, computer and telephones, is the funding sources. It's how much the city council's department budget contributes to IT, how much city manager, and so on, all the way down the line, citywide. On the bottom, it shows what it costs for the IT department to run, and that is salary and wages. It's all of their contracts for software maintenance. It's, all of their hardware purchases or telephone bills, anything like that. So I put it all on one page so you can see the top is the money that's coming in, yes, from the other departments, because the reason the IT department exists is because all of our departments need them to assist us in managing our computers and our software and our cell phones and our iPads and whatever it is that we're required to use to do our jobs.
And I get that. Here's my question is why can't, okay, so if it costs $2.4 million to run IT, Why can't IT just get a $2.4 million budget to cover all these costs?
They do, but who's going to fund it? Where does the funding
it
come
come
from?
from
And
now?
that's what the departments do.
It comes out of the general fund currently, right?
Not only general fund. So if you look at page 260, it shows each and every department that contributes. After all the general fund departments, economic development being the last one, there's a charge for streets, there's a charge for lighting and landscape maintenance, there's a charge for sewer, for storm drain, for water, for equipment maintenance, for facilities maintenance. And the way that we come up with that list of who's paying is our IT department provides finance a master inventory listing that says the finance department has X amount of computers, X amount of servers, X amount of phones, X amount of printers, phone lines, voicemails, anything that is costing us or the IT department money, whether it's in software, whether it's maintenance of the computers, telephone bills, ink, because they manage all of the ink. The only thing they don't manage for our printers is the paper. So, and I have those spreadsheets, and I'm more than happy to share them with you and sit down with any of you to explain them to you. I know when Chief Brown was here, Chief Dave Brown was here, and several years ago he was asked to fill in as the interim city manager when we were in between permanent city managers. It was during a budget season, and it was one of his biggest heartburns that he had with us. And I brought those spreadsheets to him, and I showed them to him, and I explained to him how we come up with those numbers. And he, although he still didn't like them, he appreciated understanding where those charges come from and what it takes. So for equipment maintenance, it's the same thing. Equipment maintenance is vehicle maintenance. And we get actual numbers for the previous year from the vehicle maintenance department that tells us line by line what they've spent for each department to maintain vehicles. That's not just preventative maintenance. That's if a vehicle's in an accident, whether it's our fault or not. That's, making sure that there's safe tires on there, that the oil's changed as it should be, all that kind of stuff. All of that is included in there. And there's a lot of equipment that you don't see in there, but, backhoes, they're only charged to the departments that use them. The costs for PD are their fair share, their percentage of what the total cost of equipment maintenance is. Same thing with facilities. Facilities is done a little bit different because it's based on square footage, but the assumption is the biggest buildings are going to have the biggest charges because the library is the biggest building, it's no secret, and it takes the most air conditioning, the most maintenance, the most repairs, because of the volume of people that go through there, and the square footage that they have and what it takes to cool it. So
Sounds like
maybe
the
I still have
library
some
needs
work
forward.
to do on improving the way that I present it, but
Okay, so, I know that you see, it's easy for you to see. And I'm not going to bring this out just because it's the largest number, and it's just easier to get that concept through. So when you look at police in here through IT, for $863,000, okay? And then you go back to the police, the PD's internal services line item at 2.45 million, whatever it is. It's close, it's 2.45. And then tell me if I'm right in assuming this then. This $863,000 is on top of the 2.5.
no. All the sheets are in that last tab, the very first sheet of each department, so of IT, of equipment maintenance, of facilities maintenance, is a summary. Because if you look, it's the same account numbers that are in here. All I was trying to do was summarize, just like I summarize all of the revenues, all of the expenditures at the beginning.
Department budgets and not in others.
Because not everybody has those services or requires those services. I can tell you, my department doesn't have a single vehicle. We don't have vehicles. When we go to training, we use our own
But
vehicle.
you have internal services. charges.
The ones that we are required,
So I'm saying, some departments don't even have a line item for internal services.
which I don't know which one
Okay.
does not
well,
have it.
I'll give you the list because I
Okay,
took it down.
okay.
And that goes true for city attorney as well. So it just would be good to know, first of all, if it's in, internal services is really every department, correct?
Internal,
Whatever the case may be, whether it's low or high, there's some internal services that have been allocated in that department. Is that true?
only if they require the services of that internal service department.
I mean, that could be as much as supplies or whatever, right?
Supplies are within each department's budget.
Okay,
Every
so-
department has a telephone, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but the landlines are all paid through IT because they manage the contracts. Scott is constantly working with whoever our provider is. They keep changing their names. I think Spectrum is the name now, to make sure that our contracts don't increase. And he's done it several years in a row where he works very diligently with them to try to keep the costs down for the city. And so he manages those. The cell phones are in each department's budgets, but not the landlines, not the voicemails. And that's because voicemail requires a very large software system. I believe there's a company called Blue Violet that manages that. And of course there's an annual fee. And we have someone that works in IT that specializes in our phone system. And so we charge the departments based on how many phones or voicemail lines they have.
Right.
So if every department has a cell phone,
They have
every
internal
department's got internal services.
Cell phones are within each department's budget, not through IT.
This is a
Separate.
losing battle, I'm afraid.
That's why I tell you I'm happy to share the information
so-
that I have and how we arrive at these numbers.
I have talked with a forensic CPA, and because of all of these questions every year about internal services, and I think there may be a time when we just need to come to a consensus as the best way to report them based on some options that not only the council can understand, but the public as well.
Right.
So I look forward to that dialogue.
Okay. So do I.
She's not here. Any other comments for staff or questions for staff?
I don't really have questions. I have comments, but I can
You want to wait?
hold off. I'll wait.
Okay. Sir, do you have speakers? Okay, hold on.
I have a few. For the sake of transparency, I want to read the letter that we received from the Measure U Committee. Dear Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council, we, the members of the Measure U Oversight Committee, are opposed to the City Council approving the use of $1 million for fiscal year 17-18 and $1 million for fiscal year 18-19 of Measure U funds to augment or support compensation increases for non-Measure U public safety employees. The city has had a structural deficit for many years, which has not been addressed. This deficit has been pushed down the road by the sale of the city's refuse division 7 years ago. Measure U should not be the answer to the city's structural deficit. Although the 2018-19 City of Hemet proposed budget reflects the technical wording of resolution numbers 4703 and 4731 and may seem to justify the use of $2 million for public safety compensation increases, it does not reflect the spirit or intent of the Measure U campaign. Information disseminated to the public for the use of Measure U funding, which was to be specifically used to increase public safety staffing from pre-Measure U levels. The funds were to be used for additional public safety personnel. And I say all that so that I can bring up the budgets from the last few years, and they're on our city website. But we were starting out 3 years ago, and that's not very long ago, with over $5 million taken from reserve. So today, if we use $2 million out of the Measure U to cover public safety officers, that is showing that we are making progress in coming out of a structural deficit problem. Because 2 years ago, we had money coming out of reserve of $2 million, and that's with our officers and our firefighters being the second lowest paid in the region. So that's something that we need to look at. The other thing is, I pulled up the minutes from the very first Measure U committee meeting, and pull them up on my computer here. This was in April 2017. The city attorney went over the roles and responsibilities of the committee, and the chiefs presented their plan. They presented PowerPoint presentations regarding the police, and this is online. And I received a copy of these PowerPoint presentations to the Measure U committee, and let me pull that up now. Find it on my iPad. And on the slideshow, it says the success of Measure U is dependent upon the ability to recruit and retain quality personnel. Hemet has experienced challenges in both areas. Public safety salaries were surveyed, and Hemet's salaries were second to the lowest. We are not even to the middle of the road yet. Hemet has been losing personnel as fast as they have been able to hire them. So as far as the structural deficit, we have made progress. And what we do today, we may not see until the next fiscal year or even 2 years down the road. So the fact that we can have options today to balance the budget is showing that we are doing our job. It's hard, and it's hard to constantly be cutting, but we continue to do it. And as far as using the Measure U funds, this is from our former police chief. This is his presentation to the Measure U committee. There's more documentation, and I can just keep reading about his comments to the Measure U committee. And the Measure U committee is to make sure that we're using our money for public safety. That's in the resolution. That's what we promised. So I just wanted to make that clear that that's what we received, and that's some of the information that we have.
All right, thank you. Sarah, you have public speakers?
I do. Marie McDonald, and she'll be followed by Eric Koch.
Good evening, Marie.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. First of all the members of the Measure U Oversight Committee feel that they are part of the effort, part of the team, that everybody is working, with everybody working toward the same result. And their concerns are somewhat a little different, I think, in some respects, because we hear from the public. And unfortunately, during the support of Measure U campaign, it really wasn't made clear to the public that some of those funds might be used to retain existing employees. It sounded to the public as if all the funds would go to increasing the existing cadre of both fire and police. So somewhere along the line, our education program fell down. It created an impression that now we're battling, we're trying to deal with. One of our concerns, this program, we're seeing the first year of the efforts of Measure U. We don't know what's in the future, and we were counting on having the reserves. We were so thrilled that sales tax was coming in over the estimated 10 million. And we had expected, or not expected, anticipated perhaps that there would come a time in another year or two where the sales tax would drop and we wouldn't have even the million or 10 million for 1 year. So we felt we needed to keep the surplus that was coming in on tap at least for a year or two until we got a feeling of how much sales tax was going to be actually accrued over a period of time. Also, we were concerned. The city manager spoke of increasing revenues from 3 different efforts. Plus, at a workshop about, 6 months or so ago, Alan presented a program showing perhaps increase in revenue that could be realized from developing Hemet as a hub for exterior sports activities.
Thank you, Marie. Your 3 minutes has expired. But I want to touch on, and that's one of the reasons why I asked the question that I did, is what has not been spent and carried over year after year, and the projections would be, if they continue on this pace, that by the end of 10 years, there would be an additional 20 million still left over.
But this is the first year. There wasn't any revenues or overages a year ago. And there really isn't yet a completion because we still have two cycles, don't we, on sales tax receipts
That is correct.
still coming. So we haven't experienced even a full year to know what the facts might be.
Thank you.
Hey, Mayor, if I could just
Yes, sir.
add one clarification that we can all keep in mind. We've been saying sales tax. I'd like to remind everybody that Measure U is a transaction and use tax, which is completely separate from our Bradley Burns sales tax. While they both might go into the general fund, they are under the law 2 separate taxes. So it's more appropriate to talk about Measure U as the transaction and use tax, not the sales tax. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
Eric Gosh, 150 Carriage Circle, and I'll look for that on my next Burger King receipt. A couple points, I think, to the council. One is, as it comes to the word systemic deficit, really I think what's happening, of course, is that we're chasing the same downward, or I say upward spiral of expenses year after year. So 7 years ago, the city sold trash, got $12 million up front, $3 million a year. Still this year, for the next 10 years, 8 years, going to receive $3 million a year. That $12 million initially received is gone. In fact, it was gone because we used it, the city used it to cover the deficit, structural deficit. It was a windfall. Unfortunately, we are now, that windfall has been spent in the, I don't know how many dollars a year, millions a year. So that's kind of the issue, is that it's not that the city has not done anything. City councils have done things. The problem is we're not catching up with that upward spiral of expenses, as the city manager talked about, PERS expenses and such. And that's the difficult situation that the council faces. I would again say that 10 million versus 11 million is not a surplus. It's not extra. It's not found money. 10 million had to have a number to begin with when the Measure E committee started. The city gave us a number of their expectations. Again, it was conservative. Who would want to say, well, we're going to expect 11 and actually want and plan for that and show with 10? So no, it was a conservative number, and it wound up fortunately being 10% higher than what was expected. So it's not a surplus. It's not extra, and it's not unexpected. It's just the fact that you do it conservatively. Lastly, options A, B, and C. Option A was one where we had 1.7 million for current for out of Measure U funds. Option B was spending 0 out of Measure U funds. Split the baby and come back, and option C spends $2 million out of Measure U funds. So I think kind of 1.7 versus 0 versus 2 is not exactly splitting a baby. It's kind of like quartering it. So I would like to bring that to attention. I would like to thank the Vice Mayor for reading the letter for that, and Council certainly has a hard job. I think the point of the Measure U Committee is that we try and represent what we think the citizen, the good-hearted citizen in the Valley would think about how their money should be spent from the Measure U funds. And that means that we conservatively think that there should be a reserve. And again, we want to be part of the team. That's why the Measure Keep Emmett Safe PAC was formed, was because we're willing to tax ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. And to comment on some of your comments is that the budget that the police and fire department chiefs made were based on that $10 million projection. So they budgeted for 10. So as you're correct, that what's above the $10 million is not extra. I mean, it's revenue coming in, but the police and fire chiefs didn't budget for above $10 million under their plan, their spending plans. That's all I got. So anybody else want to respond? Okay. Sarah?
I'm sorry.
Sherry?
Rich Fiber, and he'll be followed by Laura Dunner Estelle.
Was Sherry up next?
Oh, Sherry.
Sherry.
Yeah,
Yes.
Your assistant hall. Sorry. Okay, then Rich Fiber, then Laura Dunner Estelle.
Mayor and council members, first of all, I appreciate all you do. Obviously not an easy task. I'm a member of many community groups, including the College Foundation, as well as retired teachers groups. I'm a retired teacher for 25 years in the Valley, and many art groups as well. I'm here today to represent the Hemet Valley Art Association and many of the people that use the Simpson Center. And this morning we were quite blindsided by a closure notice posted on the door of the Simpson Center, effective June 30th, which is only a few days away. And obviously nobody likes to be blindsided. Some of these instructors, this is their living. The staff didn't quite know what was going on, couldn't answer questions. And the members of my fitness class were just dumbfounded and trying to figure out what to do. The Hemet Valley Art Association is looking for a new meeting place within the next week or so. So obviously that's not very acceptable. So I was trying to get it down to exactly what was going on this morning and make some sense of this. Obviously the Simpson Center is used for a meeting place and fitness, which has a lot to do with health, and as I Googled it, also a cooling center, so that fits in with public safety. It was 100 today. I learned that in April there was a meeting on the budget, and that the 20th of June there was another meeting on the budget that all involved Valley-wide and their support of the Simpson Center. I tried to get to what was going on, called down at Valley-wide. I found out that the operational contract is expiring, and that includes the insurance umbrella there, which is very important. You can't operate without it. So there's some unanswered questions, and I'd like to know what the policy and support for the city is for Valley-wide. And as I looked at their budget and their history, first it was the YMCA that took over for the Simpson Center and promptly went bankrupt and miraculously had a recovery and moved to Murrieta. And then next, the contract was awarded to Valley-wide, and they operated under a $400,000 budget in 2010. And I understand that it went on for up until 2017, but they were then half of that, and their budget was then $157,000, which is considerably less than $400,000 in 2010. They were doing their own administrative support, bare minimum shoestring, and it seemed like a very strict budget that they were giving themselves in order to maintain the Simpson Center. They asked for $209,000 to meet the cost of increased utilities and services and increased usage at the Simpson Center, which is 6,000 people a month. And I understand that they were told, no, you're going to stay with $157,000 for the next year.
Sherry, thank you. Your 3 minutes has expired.
I'm sorry. I'll get to the point. I'm hoping that the Hammett City will support Valleywide. That means so much to our valley and has done so much good. And I hope that they will prioritize the budget needs so that Simpson Center can be maintained. Thank you.
Our city manager has a comment for you.
This is actually the first time that the budget request has been made public. Dean and I have been talking about it, and I've kept the council clued in as to it. We did roll the $154,000 contract into this budget, and the council in turn, and there's a little bit of communication difficulty between Dean and me, wanted to see a finer breakdown of what that money is going for, what the $50,000 is going to go for, what kind of expenses, where are they increasing personnel, what might be their other costs to dictate the request for $50,000 more, how the revenues break down, what you're paying the staff that you're talking about, the contract people, etc. And so they just want a full understanding of that. Dean presented some figures. He made a presentation to the council, did not mention the $50,000 in addition that you were requesting, and the figures are not quite finite enough for the council, for me to advise the council at this point. Dean sent me a letter today, gave me until 3 o'clock to make a decision, and I received the letter at 5:30, and so I was unable to comply with his time frame. Nonetheless, in his last email, I had offered some alternatives, and the last communication I received for him, that he is amenable to rolling over the contract, and that we sit down and get the information that's needed in the next couple of months, and then bring it back to the council, the increase that you're asking for. And so I did in my email to Dean say, under no circumstances is that center to be closed. So that was not my doing, and I don't know who did it or whatever, but it was not an appropriate action to take. And so I am expecting the center to remain open, and for Dean and me to get together and get the information I need to present to the council. Okay? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Rick.
Good evening, City Manager, Council. I've been around a long time. I've been involved in a lot of different things. I've never been as much of a wreck as I am right now. When I agreed or I ran, I was encouraged to put my name in for this committee, the Oversight Committee. I felt, okay, I can go in there and just make sure that police and fire are towing the line and doing what they're supposed to be doing. I had no idea what it was going to entail and how it was going to be portrayed. I don't use these words very often, but I was insulted by the city manager, saying, inferring that our committee is creating divisiveness, that in no way our intent, we're trying to do our job, in protecting the money as Measure U, Measure E was portrayed to the community for additional, and that's a word that's been missing, additional police and fire personnel and equipment to support those personnel over and above the 68 police, and I'm not quite sure the fire, but we're going to add 16 is my recollection to the fire. That's what that money was to be used for. So I've been moving forward on that premise. I did not read with very much intensity the formal resolutions that the city council put out, or I might have thought a little bit differently, but not much. So, our committee, I'm not speaking for the committee, I, on our committee, voted yesterday to say to the city council that we don't think that Measure U's money should be used. We don't have any authority. We're not the bosses. We were asked to do a job. I think we were doing the job. I think we put a lot of time and effort. I read a lot of paperwork. I looked at numbers till I was blue in the face, and I'm not a numbers guy, but I appreciate what Lorena and her group did. Anybody in your department, the other departments that contributed to this, God bless you. I don't know how you do that. So don't look at the Measure U committee as the opponents in this thing. We were there to do a job. We did the job according to what we thought we were supposed to be doing. Rodney King said, can't we all get along? My God, we're not against you. We're not against the community. We tried to do a job. We put our heart and soul in it. We sat there for almost 4 hours on Monday. Do you think that if we're trying to ramrod something that we would sit there for 4 hours doing it? God almighty, I just can't believe that someone would think that we want to create divisiveness. We tried to do a job. Now it's your job. Do what you think is right. Do what you think is proper. I'll support you 100%. I always have supported the city council 100%, whether they agree with me or not, and I'll do the same here. I know I got a red light, but by God, I got to tell you, I don't know you, so I don't have an opinion of you, but I was insulted by you using the word divisiveness in concert with the Measure U committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lori. Sarah, who's up next? Not Lori. No, who's up next?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Mary Ann Harlan.
First of all, Lori Van Arsdale, 228 Jelly Way. Carly, thank you. I'm glad you brought up the points that I do think that the council has each year had to figure it out. There's cans maybe been kicked down the road in a different way, but it wasn't that you didn't work on figuring it out each year, so thank you. Public safety was the second to the lowest paid in the region, so you did have to deal with those increases. I want to emphasize that rollover that you were discussing tonight, my hair was getting bigger and bigger here, because the rollover is not going to be that amount when you get up to the amount of officers you focused on and committed to hiring. You are in the 80s when it comes to number of officers. You committed to 106. You won't have that 2 million or 1 million or 3 million every year. He's going to use it to do what it was supposed to do. So don't forget that. They're not up to full staffing, so that rollover won't be there. The other thing is I just want to say, please, for God's sake, start this budget process sooner. I can't emphasize that enough. I know we used to start on the real delivery in March. Please do that suggestion, Bonnie. I'm sorry I had to leave, but I understand you suggested a committee. Get your finance committee, work on this year-round, let your departments help you work through things. It's obvious that there are some things when you're talking about internal services that you still don't understand completely. You guys, first of all, you deserve to understand those things completely. Second of all, you owe it to the public to understand those things completely. I would sincerely beg you to pass the B option. Don't forget you have the option at mid-year or any time during the year to adjust if you had to. I think that if you do that, you've kept your word to this public, and then you have also shown a good faith effort by doing these other things. You can do it at mid-year budget review, and